I have actually pleasantly been surprised by how Warzone's quality of life is going. And if you disagree, please do let me know in the comment section below. Call of Duty has always had a problem of never really iterationally improving its Warzone experience. But now we're starting to see QOL changes to the game that are improving how the game plays, the consistency of the experience, and everything that I look for in terms of making a BR readable and enjoyable is starting to set in. We've had audio changes, we've had rebalances of lethal equipment and other general meta balances. And we've even had core functionality balancing, like the centering of your aim and how ADS transitions work, which has been really good to see. With all that said, I'm going to do the classic Warzone streamer thing, which is to complain. Now, at the bare minimum, you can argue that I'm at least self aware, but I want to talk about how Warzone can get even closer to perfect, with just a few minor changes and some slightly major changes that would put the in game experience, in my view, at the top of the line. I think Warzone has a really enjoyable mid game. I think it's definitely starting to get there in terms of the gameplay loop, but there are a few things in terms of the consistency of experience that I would really like to see changed. And some of these things are little things, and some of them are a little bit bigger. And all in all, I think they would create a very good gameplay loop for Warzone that not only will allow people to understand where they went wrong, things they did wrong, and generally improve the consistency of the gameplay experience, but they would also just be nice changes in terms of balancing. I'm really curious to hear your thoughts and feelings on some of these, so let me know in the comments section below and be sure to drop a like. Now, before we begin, it's worth mentioning that I think quality of life can only go so far. Now, yes, everything I'm going to talk about in this video relates to things happening in the game, but there are wider issues with Warzone that, unless they are addressed properly over the next course of the year, these quality of life changes simply won't matter. Server performance and general server tick rate and latency is something that's really important. The anti-cheat situation in Warzone is something that's hugely important. And also, the general crashingness of Warzone and visual clarity, just the core functionality of how things like graphics, crashing, and general game settings work, are things that need improvement. Without all three of these things generally moving in the right direction, anything QOL simply doesn't matter. But I'm going to talk about them anyway. We have to start by talking about two streaks, the cluster mine and the mosquito drone, which are new additions to Warzone that I feel just don't really have a place. Now, the cluster mine's major problem is that it basically invalidates any kind of push at all. And even if you destroy one of the cluster mines, it doesn't necessarily detonate all of them. And any small amounts of damage from any explosion on even the most minor cluster mine can make or break a push that you make on an opponent. They're far too powerful, they do too much damage, they do too much explosive damage, and if you can't detonate them by shooting a single one of the mines, they shouldn't be in the game. Nothing should be so indispensably unstoppable that it cancels out an entire aggressive push. In the case of the cluster mine, I would like to see it either removed or have the ability to detonate the entire mine with a single shot. Those would be balancing mechanisms that just work. The mosquito drone is less about the power of the drone because I don't think it's actually all that bad, but more about the consistency of the experience. I think with the mosquito drone, I would like the actual physical drone to be a little bit larger and a bit more visible, but more importantly, I'd like the area of impact that that drone could have to be visible on the map. The problem right now with mosquito drones is that it's very difficult to judge if and when they will lock onto you. And if you're creeping up on an opponent, you shoot the drone, it gives away your position. Whereas if you think you can kind of get around the drone without necessarily activating it, that would make sense. And I also think that would provide good intel to the person who's actually deployed the kill streak too. Because right now, in the case of the mosquito drone, there are some times where I felt it's super effective and other times where I can't really tell why it hasn't locked on or attacked an opponent. And just having a bit more of consistency and experience, both showing where the attack zone is and having that lock-on audio, I think would be a perfect combination. I think generally cluster mines and mosquito drones bring too much inconsistency of experience, and I think, at least in the case of cluster mines, they're just far too powerful. Next, we've got to talk about sniper balancing. Now, in the unranked variant of Warzone, I have absolutely no issue with one-shot snipers. They're a satisfying mechanism and they're fun to use. But the general issue with sniper rifles in Warzone is that they're not balanced correctly. And I'm not talking about ruining their bullet velocity, and I'm not talking about making them feeling less satisfying. I'm talking about just making them have sniper glint, and making that glint extremely visible. The problem right now with snipers is that short-range optics do not have glint, which most people tend to use, And the other issue with snipers is that that glint is very easily occluded by tiny things like the edge of wall frames or like a tiny bush. The glint should always be painstakingly visible, and it should be visible through various layers of objects. If somebody is peeking me out the edge of a window with a sniper rifle, the left half of the glint should still be bright enough that I can visibly see that opponent. And I think taking away no glint optics, generally speaking, would make the one-shot sniper experience a far more balanced trade-off to what it currently is. The fourth thing on my list is explosive spam. This has to be addressed in Warzone sooner rather than later, because the ability to stow explosives in Warzone is absolutely criminal. The ability to throw 4, 5, 6 grenades at an opponent, or 2, 3, 4, 5 thermite grenades at an opponent, is without doubt the most busted mechanic in the game. And it's something that shouldn't be in the game. And I also don't think that munitions boxes should automatically resupply a full set of utility, or at least should have different behaviors depending on the mode. So let's talk about why. Now, in solos, it's not really an issue if you resupply off of a equipment box or an ammo station and you get 2 grenades and 2 tacticals. That's fairly balanced. But in the solo experience, you also get riot shielders who stow 6 or 7 stun grenades, and you also get guys who stow 3, 4, 5 frag grenades. And I think people have realized that the easiest way to kill an opponent is to not really engage with them at all. And that was also the case in Warzone 2 Ranked. Warzone 2 Ranked became incredibly utility orientated to a point where pretty much every single fight against top 250 teams, you would see 5 or 6 grenades get lobbed, if not more. And this is a double-edged problem for 2 reasons. One, stowing abilities like lethals and tacticals should absolutely not be allowed. And 2, things like a protection system against grenades should be purchasable options off of buy stations. They shouldn't be something that you have to find in the wild, considering how important they are to the general structure of the game. I also think in trios and quads, rather than recharging everybody with, 2 lethals and 2 tacticals, it should be 1 tactical and 1 lethal, forcing coordination between teammates in order to stop them spamming explosives. Because right now, if a single team throws down an equipment box during a push, that is 6 more grenades on top of the 6 extra grenades they already could have thrown, or 8 more grenades on top of the 8 that they already could have thrown. And I think explosive spam generally in this game just leads to too many problems. And whilst there are some mitigations against it, it's pretty much impossible to stop without limiting the amount of devices, and I think it's something that needs to be looked into. Fifth on my list, and an extension of explosive spam, is that I don't think stun grenades should be in Call of Duty. They're a crutch mechanic that mostly benefits players who don't actually want to fight opponents and simply want to hide from them. And I'm going to say it, even if it sounds a little bit salty and a little bit petty, it's for bad players. It's not something that should be utilized in the game, and it's a mechanic that basically allows terrible players to get cheap kills. Now, I'm not saying that this game should be catering entirely to the elitist of the most elite game players, but I think anything that stops you from both moving and shooting back simultaneously is definitely overpowered, and I think most people would agree. I like the flashbangs in this game because they stop you from seeing, but they don't stop your mobility. So you still have the ability to move into cover, or at least remember kind of the tracing of your steps to get out of a situation. But stun grenades give you no exit, and that is a problem. For the most part, nearly every other tactical in the game allows you some kind of response. A gas grenade lets you shoot back, albeit somewhat waverly. A shock stick does the same, you can still hip fire. A flashbang lets you move out the way. But only in the case of stun grenades do you have a physical item that stops you from moving, and I think that's a huge issue. Next up on the list is shields. This is my 6th thing on the list, and they've just got to go. The shield meta of Warzone at the moment, especially in solos, is on par with the Big Bertha meta in solos back in the days of Verdansk. The reality is that riot shields don't have a place in Call of Duty. A game about having gunfights with opponents shouldn't have riot shields in them. The riot shields are extremely overpowered, extremely versatile, and in a solos environment are exploited to their maximum effect. It is incredibly easy for any riot shielder to throw 2 stuns and 2 thermites and call it a day. And pretty much every riot shielder is packing 3 or 4 munitions boxes, refilling their stuns with recharge or restocks, and it's just not a balanced experience. And people always say you can counter a shielder with utility, and it's like, sure, you can, if they haven't stun grenaded you 6 times before you've even had a chance to blink. And on top of that, most of those utilities require a direct hit. be it a thermite or a drill charge or a semtex. And in the case of a battle royale game, you're not always going to have those lethals or tacticals on hand to counter something like a riot shield. In my view, if you use a riot shield, you shouldn't be allowed to use tacticals and lethals, or you should have a far more serious mobility penalty. I also just generally don't think they should be in the game, but if they want to, they need to balance them properly. And they need to balance them with an understanding that they are heavily exploited in solos gameplay, or even just ban them from solos. Up next on my list at 7 is the redeploy options in Warzone. Now, I would personally like to see an increase in player count, but a reduction in the frequency of redeploys. We have portable buys, we have buy stations, we have flares, and we have redeploy packs. And whilst those are all great options and they definitely reduce the amount of camping on buys and reliance on buy stations, I would like to see just a little bit less of it, like 20 to 30% less of these redeploys, because at the moment, sometimes regular BR feels more like Resurgence and less like regular BR. And I think that is genuinely a problem. This kind of links to my explosive spam QOL update, if you will, but the eighth thing on my list are buy station options. Things like being able to buy the counter to grenades, or things like potentially being able to buy a portable decontamination station and having them limited to one per buy station would actually increase the variety of gameplay and offer alternative routes for players to defend or attack positions or make different plays. I would argue at this point the protection system against grenades is an essential part of Warzone, and anything that is that essential should just be something that you can purchase in the game. The next thing is self-revive and revive audio. Now, there were some changes to this recently that made revives a bit more obvious, and also played a specific tune if somebody was using a medic vest to revive faster. But the audio still, I don't think, is enough, and I also think self-res audio should be far louder to identify when opponents are self-reviving. The 10th change I would make is directional audio to up and down. I think right now, being able to tell the difference between whether somebody's above you or below you is incredibly muddy in Warzone, and they need to do something with some sort of pitch correction or bass changes to make it more particularly obvious if somebody is above you or below you. Directional audio in this game for the most part is heading in the right direction, but I think up and down audio, especially in things like stairwells, is just a nightmare to coordinate with. The final thing on my list at 10 is universal smoke. Smoke grenades right now seem to have lots of issues, both in terms of the visibility between two different players with two different perspectives, the way they seemingly work for some people and don't work for others, one-way smoke, and at the moment, we just need a system that's more consistent. Smoke grenades should be volumetric, they should occupy a space, and they should work the same way the smoke grenades work in Counter-Strike 2. In CS2, smoke grenades have a universal appearance for absolutely everyone, and on top of that, they occupy a volume of space. And if somebody fires a bullet into the smoke, it makes the smoke dissipate. I think this would not only bring balance to the smoke grenade meta, but also make them a more consistent experience for people utilizing them. I've had a lot of instances recently where I've genuinely thought somebody might have been cheating, because for them, the smoke was just clearly visible, I was fairly easy to see, and I wasn't that occluded. But for me, the smoke grenade was just fully in my face and it was impossible to see anyone. And stuff like that is a consistency of experience problem, which makes the game less enjoyable. So folks, that's it for my list. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Are there any changes that you're hoping they'll make to the core Warzone experience? I'm interested to see your thoughts and feelings, so drop them down below.